This lecture considers the business impact of the GDPR in regard to data subjects' rights. I'll speak about reviewing existing systems and personal data processing. We'll consider the value of staff training for increasing GDPR awareness, and we'll discuss updating website privacy policies and notices. I'll finish with a challenge. Should you ask existing contacts if they're happy with the way your organization processes their personal data? Let's consider the business impact of the GDPR. Under the GDPR, it's the data controller's responsibility to notify data subjects of their rights. Usually, this is done via a privacy notice. This notice is displayed prominently on the organization's website. For most smaller businesses, serving an individual's rights involves doing three things. It requires reviewing existing systems and processes. It requires training staff in GDPR awareness and updating published privacy policies and notices. Let's consider each in a little more detail. What about your existing systems and processes? For example, do your existing systems and processes enable your organization to identify and isolate all copies of all personal data relating to an individual data subject? It's trickier than it sounds. Consider some of the backups you might have. Let's say I exercise my right to be forgotten by your organization. Must you plow through all backup copies of any personal data held on me? If you already have implemented proper backup retention policies, ensuring personal data is kept for no longer than necessary, this shouldn't be a problem. In this situation, your organization's data controller could argue, on balance, your organization's need to maintain properly secured backups exceeds my right to be forgotten. But this illustrates the sorts of issues you'll need to consider for serving data subjects with their rights. Maybe your company's got multiple non-compliant systems and processes. To sort them out, no doubt you'll prioritize your planned remedial actions. But you shouldn't order those priorities from your own perspective. Instead, priorities need ranking according to the risks to the rights and freedoms of the data subjects. Rather than start from scratch, why not review and implement existing recommended GDPR compliance approaches? For example, the Irish Data Protection Commissioner publishes a succinct small business GDPR preparation guide. There's also the UK ICO's Preparing for the GDPR, 12 Steps to Take Now. Both documents give a high-level overview of the main steps smaller organisations need to take for their GDPR compliance. An important part of the review process is the need to audit your personal data. This means locating all personal data wherever it's stored. Usually this personal data relates to customers and staff. The GDPR obliges organisations to protect personal data against unauthorised or unlawful processing, plus additional information security measures to prevent its accidental loss, damage or destruction. To achieve this, businesses need detailed processes to manage their personal data. The technology used must have up-to-date security settings. Let's consider staff training issues. Staff processing personal data need training on a data subject's rights under the GDPR. They must be able to recognise and properly respond to a subject access request. For general office staff, this requires an awareness and an understanding of the GDPR's obligations, plus a knowledge of any organisation's specific policies and processes for serving a data subject's rights. Let's also consider specialist staff, such as those in sales, marketing, customer service, support, or information technology. These staff who handle personal information usually require more in-depth, domain-specific training on the GDPR and its specific impact on your business. Keep records on who's received GDPR awareness training. For those staff who somehow always manage to avoid their obligatory compliance training, ensure you catch up with them and get them trained. You might consider the GDPR training framework proposed in a Telegraph newspaper article. It outlines 3 key objectives. 1. To raise broad awareness of the risks posed by GDPR non-compliance. The main risks are heavy fines and potentially loss of reputation. 2. Ensure everyone completes their required training, accepts the changes imposed by the regulation, and transitions to the new regime. 3. Most importantly, incorporate training into induction procedures to ensure new staff are trained on GDPR issues before commencing work on personal data. What about privacy policies and notices? Most organisations will need to update their privacy policies and notices to comply with the GDPR. The information that must be provided to the data subject when their personal data are being collected are laid out in Article 13. For example, required information includes the data controller's details, the purpose of processing, and its legal basis. There's additional information explaining what happens to the data, for how long it's kept for, and what the data subject's rights are in relation to the data. Controllers also need to inform data subjects about their right to lodge a complaint with the supervisory authority. Finally, should you ask existing contacts if they're happy with the way you're processing their personal data? This approach isn't recommended for the faint-hearted. You might send them an email explaining what the GDPR is and how it affects their rights. You could ask them if they want to unsubscribe from a newsletter or be removed from your database. You'd want an autoresponder to simplify the process. But please be very careful. If a data subject opts out, you can't go back to them asking them to opt back in. It may, and I repeat, may be a viable approach if you're absolutely certain you have already obtained robust contact list consents. If you're not completely sure, please leave this well alone.